Okay, we're going to start the next session with Qatar's past reimagined, as you can see up on the screen, and it's a combination of Grant Cox and Maria Garcia. Can I just leave it at that?
Yes.
All right, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so this is, well, my colleague Grant from ArtasMedia, and this is Maria Garcia-Abadillo from Barker Langham. So I'll start to do a bit of introduction of myself. I'm head of digital at Barker Langham. We're a cultural consultancy company that has been working for around 20 years now, and mostly around the Middle East. We do research, we do interpretation, we do content, and only since the past few years we've started to do some have a proper digital department and doing some digital media work, and starting to also produce whatever we can do ourselves, obviously with help of experts like Graham here. And we met a few years ago in a project in the UAE, working on an app for port in Casablanca in Abu Dhabi. And since then we've been in touch, we're doing work together. And yeah, maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit, sure. And then we can introduce the project.
So my background is an archaeologist. I was at the University of Southampton, undergrad and masters, and I worked on the Ports project with Simon Key at the university for a couple of years before creating my own company, and I've been freelance ever since. We've been doing a lot of web tool work, reconstruction, Unreal Engine development, animation, any kind of freelance project basically. But for this project, it was a lot of 3ds Max, Vray, kind of quick, heavy-duty modelling. So we're going to show you a quick video that we've put together.
Should we introduce the project just a little bit?
Yeah, okay, yeah, go for it.
So yeah, this project was for the Qatar National Library. We got approached by them, Barker got approached by them like last summer, and they wanted to do this like website, which is like a timeline of the history of Qatar. They wanted us to do all the research, 150 events, all the script, all the research, and a lot of media content for that, like illustrations, animations, interviews, documentaries, like a lot of things. And between all of that, well, the main challenge was that they wanted that to happen in less than 3 months. So they wanted the website to be launched before the World Cup. So I don't know what we said. Yes, this is one of the problems that we normally we need to maybe question the briefs a bit more, and maybe speak to them and say this is actually impossible. But we did say yes, and one of the reasons why it was like Grant, we spoke to Grant, because one of the things that they wanted to include, and that they included in the brief, was this 360 experiences. And the only brief we got from them was, we want to create a number of 9 of 360 content in presenting Qatar's history. Content presented in this medium can be forts or dhows. Dhows are the vessels that they used to propel in the Gulf. So that's the only brief we got from them. So I immediately called Grant and said, do you think you can do this? He was like, well, what are we going to do? I said, well, it's for us to decide. So we identified a few settlements, archaeological settlements in Qatar, all related to fishing and pearling industries there. We also identified like a Portuguese ship that was very relevant for in the history of Qatar, because it was the presence in the Gulf from the Portuguese was that ship was very important for them. And then we also identified like a pearling chest as well, that we did like a 3D, well, you did a 3D model for it, and and also like a panoramic view of the dhow and some other things. So yeah, this is a little bit of what we've done together for this project.
Yeah, this is a lot of stuff from this project, which we'll then go into detail about, but also some of the precursory stuff that I worked with on Barker Langham. Right, I think we can move on. Okay, so for this project in particular, there were 9 sites that ended up getting identified for the project, and the first real issue with it was we had a very short timescale. We only had about 9 weeks to. I think I worked out in the end, even if I got rid of every weekend for the next 2 months, it would have been about 7 to 8 days per site, including research, including finding all the information. It was a lot to take in. So there's plenty to cover in that period. So getting access to research, evidence, finding a way to the rapid creation process, dealing with large-scale landscapes. There's a lot of problems in there for the CGI process in terms of making it look good, especially quickly. Giving the site a sense of activity and feeling like it's got something more than just an empty shell. And then having the timescale on that to get actual feedback from people we were bringing in to give us evidence and the partners on the project. So something that I've been dealing with, especially the archaeology modelling in recent years, is procedural modelling, just taking as much as I can and making it a rules-based generation of geometry, textures, whatever it is, so that I can quickly go in and edit it, change it, update it, because often I'll have an archaeologist sitting next to me that wants, 5 variations of the way that the walls could have looked, or maybe we just need to play around with the placement. So going in and doing something, perhaps how they do in studios for purpose with previous shots, doesn't really hold up too well in a lot of the research projects that I've been involved in, because of that need to redo it maybe 3 or 4 times once you have maybe an external specialist come in and have a look at it, or the boat specialist come in and look at it, or a workshop that we attend to, and the feedback from that. So I had to apply a lot of the techniques I've been using in the 3D workflow to this project just to get it done, basically. So my software of choice for this is 3ds Max Vray, and that's not because that was the best, that's because that is the one I have the most experience with. So I did not want to be learning new software midway through trying to get this done. I have been doing a lot of my more recent work in Unreal Engine, which I would love to use on this project, but I do not think that we would have finished. And then with the understanding that this was my first project with Qatari archaeology, we needed to identify people who could help us, and we sent lots of emails out pleading for help. Please, can you help us? And we managed to identify 3 archaeologists, Gareth Rees, Robert Carter and Alexis Pantos, who had worked at the majority of the sites we were looking at, and they had a lot of experience of that area of archaeology. So the first one on the list, we're not going to cover all of them, we'll just go through, pick out a few, but I wanted to cover the first one because we got asked to recreate the Floor de la Mer. And I'm not a maritime archaeologist, but I am based in Southampton, so I know a lot of maritime archaeologists, and I picked up a few things from projects I've worked on in the past. I was aware that the Floor de la Mer as a ship has never been found, and there is very little evidence of what the Floor de la Mer looks like. So I immediately said, maybe we should do a more general Portuguese reconstruction ship from that period and try to do something a bit more generic, which was refused. No, we have to have the Floor de la Mer. So,
and this is because it exists a model of that particular boat done by these guys for Premiership.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
In MOQs and the National Museum of Qatar. So the Qatar National Library wanted exactly that same bow, even if the remains had never been found. So obviously Grant was a bit like skeptical of like saying, well, I don't want to say that I've done a 3D model of that particular bow because, you know, it's not accurate, but we ended up doing it and calling it a Portuguese ship of the early 15th century.
So I think in the end I ended up attempting to do something as close as possible that could be done, and we just kind of forged ahead thinking that, well, we'll get something done, and I mean they're not going to refuse it, are they? So I started looking around for resources and doing my own research, asking maritime archaeologist friends, specialists in the period, people like John Adams at the University of Southampton, what would you do if you were in my situation? And they sent me to some interesting paintings from the period, from slightly later, 50 years or so later, that were very detailed, showing ships, but none of them showed the exact ship. So there was no real information of this is the Flor de la Mer. There's lots of things like on the right, kind of generic illustrations, but they're showing more general Portuguese ships from the period. They're not showing specific individually built ships. There was a reconstruction in Malaysia, which wasn't what that was based on has never really been brought to light. So how much we can trust that, we don't know. And so yeah, I came back with all of these questions, and at the same time I was asking Barker Langham and Maria, can we try and find who had done the work on the ship from the model makers? If this is the model that is desired, they must have done some research. So independently, I went away, spoke to John, spoke to some maritime archaeologists, and we came up with the idea that, well, we could go and look at something which we do have the plans for, which is the Santa Maria, and maybe we could turn that into a Portuguese carrack or a now and refit it a little bit. And then about a week later, I got an email from Maria with a PDF from the model makers, and they'd done this before, and this was their exact process. So these drawings are them refitting the Santa Maria into the Flor de la Mer model. So we both independently came to the same conclusion. So it was quite nice to have that second layer of that kind of knowledge come in to me running on this, because I was just doing this as a general archaeologist, not someone with a massive legacy of diving or working on these ships. So that was the route we ended up taking. And in terms of modelling, I think I modelled it in about 4 days in the end, and just had to find every route possible to make it as quick but as visually appealing as possible. So I made many different texture sets for the different parts of the model. Lots of UDIMs to split out the and if you're not used to the jargon, UDIMs are effectively when you have a texture map unwrapped, you can have multiple variants of that. So you can split one texture set into maybe 10, and that means the resolution of those individual textures can be much higher. So you can cover a much greater area. So your one object, instead of looking bad when you hold it here, can now look amazing because you've effectively tripled or quadrupled or however many times you want risen the resolution of your model. This was then taken into Substance Painter and painted so that I had more control over the timbers, the textures, the parts of the model themselves, in also painting the water. So that process was used to kind of massively speed up the feedback, and that meant that if someone came in and said, actually, that design doesn't look right, can we change it? I was able to really quickly go in and repaint a new flag or repaint a part of the ship and turn off layers on and off. So Substance Paint is great. And if you ever use Photoshop, the principle is not too dissimilar in terms of having your layers and you can paint things on and off. But it does offer very quick turnaround for and very reflexive turnaround for things that used to take a long time 10, 15 years ago when we were doing 3D CGI graphics. So that was the floor de la mer. So moving on to the general processes for the cities. Again, I had to approach it with a procedural modelling in mind. So procedural modelling is just an umbrella term for techniques that use effectively a structured set of rules to create geometry, textures, any kind of thing inside of a model, so that you change one part of the rule and then you can massively change what it is that you get at the end. So for example, we created style sheets for Qatar archaeology architecture, and we could have multiple variations of different entrances, windows, whatever you wanted inside of the model, and then you could take a pin out of the style sheet and it would just replace it with something else, or you could update it and add in another 10 styles, and you've already built the base inside the model, so it would just update onto all the structures. So that meant I could make one variation, go away, send all the shots out to the archaeologists, and then they could say, oh, maybe add these windows in. I could do the windows, stick them in the style sheet, and then they'd randomize across the entire model. That made my life a lot more easy in terms of creating the models. So here's an example of it working in practice. So it made it very easy to block out the site with lines, create multiple variations of architecture, and even create custom parameters into the workflow itself, so that I could have options like turning off the roofs or changing the heights, turning on the gutters and turning them off, what floor the building was on. So I might want to get rid of the foundation, for example. So we could quickly make those changes, and it wasn't just for kind of traditional architecture. It was also things like the more what's it called, organic elements of the site too. So the huts, all of these could be created in a procedural way that made adding them into the model and creating quick variation a lot easier to deal with. So I'll just click on from that, and all the way down to things like the towers, just having rules for, you know, how much spacing should there be between the crenellation, how big should they be. Being able to sit there on a Skype call with someone in Qatar and just make those changes was made my life infinitely easier. So yeah, thank you. So the model ended up being a series of building blocks, almost like 3D Lego, with assets that were then scattered using Forest Pack, which is a scattering program for 3ds Max, and they were applied to the sites themselves. So, Maria, would you like to do a quick intro about Subara?
Drink some water.
Yeah, I'll drink some water.
So yeah, this is a reconstruction of Al Subara. This is I think the most important settlement in Qatar in terms of trade and pearling. So its heyday was like mid 1700s, and we did have some information from Subara, from Rock Qatar. Then also Gareth had worked a lot on Subara as well. So yeah, also Grant created like the reconstruction of the city, but also for the website we added like some hotspots as well, in which you can click on different points and then discover more about the city and the life in the city, and the trading routes that were going from Subara to everywhere in the world basically, archaeological remains and so on. So yeah.
So the site itself is a big site, so again, doing this in a short period of time, having about a week to dedicate to this, reading through all the site reports, there's a lot of information there. So I was getting a lot of help from Rob and Gareth, specifically, especially saying to them, look, I don't know anything about this site. I can't learn it in a week. I need to be finished in a week. So I really need your help. So they were pointing out specifically the elements of the site that had been excavated, where the points of interest were. They'd sent me a lot of site reports, end of season reports, and picked out the most up-to-date interpretations from those that I then directly put into the model and was modeling directly from. So we had the overall general map. So you can see here the overall general map in the model that was being modeled from, but then I had these regional areas where I had those specific illustrations and site report elements that were going in, so that I could refine those areas of detail. There was a little bit of interpretation because the archaeological, the lines, especially for the walls, weren't didn't cover the whole site. It was sparse in areas. There were areas that were unfinished that they hadn't found walls for or they didn't know. So there were some kind of hypothetical lines drawn on some of the site reports about how the neighbourhoods may have been finished. So we went in and tried to keep the rules across from other parts of the city to complete those. So it's probably a bit difficult to see there, but you see that there's just a little bit more order coming in. And then when it's lit from the other angle, you can kind of see it a bit more clearly that now there's some more defined main streets and other areas. So yeah, I just had to really go hell for leather for these to get them done. But that was Zibara. And then we went back in again for the experience itself to start creating hotspots. So here we've got a camera looking down at the walls, and my goal when I was building this was to try and make it as attractive as possible to render at fairly close distance. I didn't want it to just fall apart when the camera went in close enough. Obviously, you're not going to be looking, very, very intimate shots from inside someone's house in this model, but at least having the camera looking at some street networks. So most of the textures I was dealing with were procedural in terms of their generation, and worked out where the dust should be, where level should be. So once I had the kind of plaster or mud brick textures done, I could just throw it on a building and it would work out the things I needed it to work out.
One other beautiful thing you did was like for the different sites you made, like you applied different daylight.
Yes, yeah. So we messed around with different kind of rendering times of day just to give each site a different feel to it. So
this is another example.
Yeah, this is another example, and this is a slightly different example because there was way less information about this site.
Yeah, so Albida is a site from like the early 1800s. This was the first settlement of Doha. So then Doha grew up from Albida, but then Albida was destroyed in 1821 by a British ship from the East India Company. So completely destroyed. So there's like nothing that has been preserved apart from that map that you see on screen, which is an 1823 map in which you can see both settlements. One is Bida and one is Doha.
Yeah, so these two.
So they ended up merging in the end. And yeah, there was like, there's nothing else from Bida that we can draw on to create the model apart from we do have the little RC.
Yeah, so there's a really tiny illustration in the top left, and that kind of shows the approach from a ship's perspective. So we did have that to kind of blow up. It wasn't great resolution when I got it, but it was, at least it gave an idea. And then we did have an account of the mountain range in the background, and also the fact that there was a watchtower on the hill.
Yeah.
So we had some quite emotive elements to deal with.
Personal accounts from like British diplomats that were there, like just like a few lines, and that map. That's the only thing that Rand was working with.
And then Rob sent through some shots from the 1950s where we thought we could take. He didn't imagine that the kind of life in terms of space had changed too much in the way that the houses were at that period. So we took a lot of inspiration from kind of 1950s, late 1940s photography to try and keep the idea of the neighborhoods and how the houses look. And that was also then sent back across other models if required. This whole project was so intense that there wasn't really a linear structure to it. I was bouncing back and forwards, and if something, I've got that there, I'm going to reply that back to that. And so there was a lot of to and froing of using research from one area to the next. So that was the final shot for Bida. And then we've got a shot with it on the hill with the watchtower. Lusail?
Lusail. So Lusail is a settlement from the early 1900s. This is very relevant because it's where Sheikh Jassim, who is the founder of Qatar, settled with his family back in 1903, I think, and then he lived there until he died in 1913. He was buried in that city, so it's quite relevant for for Qatari people. And then again, for this one, we did have a bit more of information, didn't we? Well, a bit of personal accounts, this artistic illustration, and a bit of help as well.
So we had some illustrations to go with, which I can now no longer source for some reason. We also have the Al Wakra Heritage Village, which we were told to look at to take some of the architectural elements from, which again were then used back across other sites. The model of Lusail is one of the more unique ones because it's a lot more intimate. It was done in a lot more detail in terms of the neighbourhoods and the close-ups and things. There's the black tents that were a big element of this reconstruction, and also the way that the interaction of kind of the dhows and the ships on the seafront and how they work in collaboration with the town. There's a very clear account of how many ships they had and of what type and where they were in the town. So this was a much more intimate model, and also in terms of hierarchy and space, there is the Sheik's compound there. Is that right? Mm-hmm. Which we were trying to bring light to. So this was a much more intimate model, and the close-ups of this I think showed the best kind of sense of maybe activity in a model in terms of. Wait, where did I put that?
Picture of the camel.
I did. Oh well.
That's in the video.
That's in the video. But so like this is a good example from Lusail of the boats going out, hurling boats going out, and some of the kind of close-ups. What's that? Okay, so yeah, I mean that's effectively it. That's we've got Freya, where we had some fishing traps and mounds in terms of middens, and yeah, those are that's it. We're done.
Well done.
Oh, thank you.
So how many weeks was it?
So we first met end of July, and it was delivered by November. It was delivered by the World Cup.
So you can only start work like
I only started
in
work
September, really.
End of
it's
August.
Like, yeah.
Because we were waiting for it to get approved and things sent over. So it was September, October until the World Cup.
Was it just you?
Yes.
Just him. And he was the only one, from all the people we collaborated with, he was the only one that delivered on time. It was amazing.
Yeah, it still hasn't launched, by the way.
Not yet. It's highly confidential.
3D Max, haven't you?
Yeah, 3ds Max, Vray, yeah. But I mean, it's...
Yeah.
I don't want to do one like that again anytime soon.
Well, you will. We'll, working on another one.
Yeah.
Hopefully not that. There's so much time constraint.
Oh, yeah.
Just thinking in terms of clients management, did things go through Barker Langham, or were you having to sort of speak directly to the
Yes,
clients?
sometimes they wanted to see the progress of his work, and so I was like, Grant, can you join a call with the client? And then he was like, sort of explaining everything that he was on doing to them, and they were absolutely fascinated with everything. It looks so well informed and so realistic and so professional that I think they sort of forgot to actually. So only at the very end they were like, oh, by the way, can you let us know where the sources of all your work come from and who are the people that you've consulted as like subject matter experts? I think because they were so confident that was an amazing work done by him, and then it was just so they were very specific with all the rest of the types of media we've done. Like they've come with many comments on every little thing. With Grant's work, there's just approved like straight away. So it's just very, very good to work with them.